Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Today's episode, I have with me Chris Bentley. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing well, Doc. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm going to open this up just a little bit with how I got to you. I want to throw a shout out to Brian Webb, amazingly powerful man, and he's always looking out for the best interests of Truth Talks. And he called me up and says, "Man, I've got a story for you." He told me a little bit about your book, which is Burning Bellatorum. The story of a $40 million fraud, and there's a little extra to that. We're going to have you get into that in just a little bit. This is possibly the most interesting podcast I've ever done. It has made me think so many different directions, so many different attitudes. I don't know if I'd have made the same decision, which then made me think, I don't know if I'm as good of a man as you are. There's a lot of things that are still unsolved at this point. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So introduce yourself and let's just get right into your story.
Well, thanks, Dr. Mitch. My name's Chris Bentley. As you said, I was in the Marine Corps for 14 and a half years. I thought I was going to be a lifer in the Marines, and things didn't work out that way for a number of reasons. But after 14 and a half years, I got out, moved back to Texas, where I'm from, and I got into the oil and gas industry. In 2014 and 2015, I was working for another company full-time and then another company on top of that part-time and making really good money. Well, as a lot of people know, the oil and gas industry started to tank in 2015, and I got laid off at the end of 2015. And so in 2016, I started my own company doing the same thing, trading in mineral rights, doing small deals, and then it just grew. And so long story short, had a successful company, grew it from, a kitchen table startup to a fund with about, a total at its high point of $40 million in assets under management between debt and equity, about 150 investors and 21 employees. And, there were some very legitimate years, a few years, and then when things started going downhill, I committed fraud and ended up turning myself in. Nobody knew anything. There was no investigation or anything, but I hired an attorney and went and just sat down with the feds and spilled the beans. And now I'm awaiting official indictment.
Which is mind-blowing to me. When you and I had talked prior to doing this podcast, I just couldn't hardly wrap my head around all of that initially. It took me a second to sit back and think about that. I want to kind of go from kind of the chronological order of the business and how you got into those assets, and that'll kind of give everybody the sneak peek into the story of the guilt, if you will, that we will share a little bit later.
Yeah. So like I said, in 2016, I opened up my own company. At first, it was just doing services, the same, if you're familiar with what a landman is, it's short for land manager, petroleum land manager. And it's, to put it in simple terms, it's like real estate for the oil and gas industry. You get leases, mineral rights, and in the US, it's pretty unique because we can own the rights to the natural resources under the ground. And as a property owner, you get paid a royalty on those. And so our business model was to go buy those mineral rights and then collect royalties and then flip the properties. At first, 2016, small deals or just providing services like brokering those, the assets, finding the deals and finding a buyer, connecting the buyer and seller and making a commission. And then in 2017, took on one investor, again, small deals, did really well. He got his financial advisor, and then I got a few friends in my MBA program and grew it, and then did really well and grew and grew and grew. So those were the legitimate years. Fast forward to 2019, and I talk about this in the book, but, we hit some operational challenges, if you will. Like any small business, we're still a small business, grew extremely fast. So nothing nefarious yet, but we had some challenges. So things going into 2019, we couldn't put that capital to work in good deals. So I started buying deals that were less desirable than how I built the track record of the company. So that's the first mistake. Again, not illegal, not even you could argue whether it was ethical or not to invest into a deal that kind of deviated from our previous strategy, but still nothing illegal yet, right? And so then run out of operating capital somewhere in Q2 of 2019, and also the industry starting to take a downturn. We've got our internal issues, so I committed my first act of fraud by trying to mark up a deal so that, hey, I told the investors we're going to pay 6 million for it when we really paid 5.6, and I took that extra 400K and funneled it through various transactions, and and then that's a felony. That's wire fraud and bank fraud. I'm moving money around to deceive all the people who have eyes on these accounts and make it all look like it's above board. I get that 400K back to my operating company, buy us a little time, like, okay, now I can breathe easy. I'm going to make everything right. Nobody's going to know anything. And once we get all these issues squared away, nobody will be none the wiser. Everybody will be made whole, whatever. Right. So fast forward a few months later, oil and gas industry starts to tank again in 2019. So I start doing the same type of thing to survive, and then just end up digging a hole. And then where I brought on a lot of debt later in 2019, again, to try to survive. And then here comes 2020, dumpster fire, and go into 2020 already on the back foot, already having, dug a hole. But I keep doing it in 2020, bringing on more debt from other private lenders, put my own house up as collateral, sold my vehicles, bought cheaper used vehicles so I could fund the company. So, I just did a lot. I put everything at risk, not just my investors' capital, but, my freedom, obviously, for knowing that I was breaking the law, and then my family's livelihood. Bet the ranch, as they say in entrepreneurship. I truly did. And I did that also by committing fraud, like telling multiple people, yeah, I'll give you a personal guarantee. I'll put my house up as collateral. And, but I did lose, like, the investors that wanted my house as collateral, at least one group of investors, they were, call it smart enough or not trusting enough of me. I took advantage of the trust of other investors that didn't require like an actual deed to my house, but a certain group of investors had a deed to my house, which was paid off. And, they kept a copy of that deed. And if things went south, they were able to act on it, which is what ultimately happened. So here I am now, fast forward to 2022. Like I said, I'm awaiting official indictment and living with my in-laws, and luckily my family's still intact, and my wife is now the breadwinner. So while I kind of wait to see what the future holds.
You laid it all on the line with your investors, and at the end of the day, it just seems different to me. It seems like a different type of story than what you typically hear. I kind of want to continue to roll this on down the road a little bit. What is it that was inside you that you were like, I've got to turn myself in? And then tell us how you did that.
You got to understand the company. And as I think I rushed to get this book published, and probably didn't do as great a job as I could have telling the story. Was trying to be concise and use, with today's attention spans in there. But anyway, long story short, the company, Bellatorum is plural for warrior, soldier. And to give you a little background on the company, we were all veterans. We had some, I would say, extreme camaraderie and brotherhood and sisterhood. I mean, we had females in there too, but, we had a company and a team that was something truly special. So take that piece of information also with, I have been on my own spiritual journey way more so in the last few years than in previous periods of my life. And I was just getting like, I believed, and I believe my team believed in integrity and and honor and doing business in a way that was, ethically moral and just above board, right? And so I got to this point now where even if my business survived, it would have been built on this house of cards and lies and something that I would have to live with personally. And then as I'm going to church and to Bible study and reading scripture every day and just going on my own personal journey, and I'm struggling with this, knowing that I'm committing these lies and these sins, and it was just poking me in the eye, so to speak. Every Bible study, every daily verse or scripture that I would read, it was wow. I opened to some random page in the Bible to do my morning reading, and it was like, wow, you can't, everything was saying, you got to confess your sins. You can't live like this, and this. And it was like, just struck a chord with me. And it got to a point where, I couldn't do it anymore. I mean, sure, there was, I've had people tell me, like, you were so close to getting some huge capital infusions. Why did you just go turn yourself in? Like, you could have bought some more time, kept doing what you're doing, and probably came out where nobody, like everybody would have been made whole and nobody would have been none the wiser. Right. But, I was getting suicidal. I mean, it was like, I couldn't live with myself. It was you think when you're living that type of lie and everybody's in the dark, nobody knows the truth. When somebody asks you a simple question like, hey, how was your day? And you say, oh, it's fine. I had to be the CEO of a successful company. I can't say, oh, you know what? It's actually been shit. And that would have been the truth. So then even something as simple as saying, yeah, everything's great, that's a lie. And then those little bitty lies of just wearing a smile on your face, it just wears on you. And it gets to a point to where I was just like, you know what? Excuse my language, was like, fuck it. I got to just go come clean on this. I got to, I'll figure out how to make things right. But, and I believe that, hey, I can't follow God and honor God by continuing to lie. I know that a lot of people are going to be hurt by this, but if I'll find another way to make everybody whole. And it's got to be through not having to lie anymore. So that was the thinking. I mean, there was a little bit of pressure from the lenders, but I'm not going to say their names or throw them under the bus, but I believe they also wanted me to continue to try to search for other capital to make them whole. I don't think they wanted me to come clean. I did tell them very shortly before I told the feds, like, hey, I didn't tell them at length that I told everybody else and told the feds, but I said, yeah, look, I lied to you guys about the loan. And, so I guess they could have turned me in if they wanted to, but it was in their best interest for me to try to find the capital somewhere else. So, I saw myself as I looked into the future, like, I'm going to be standing on a stage one day talking to some people at an event about, oh, how do we achieve our success? And I'm going to have to continue this lie for the rest of my life, even if I make it right. Right. And I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to see myself as a 50-year-old man at some event like, hey, Chris, come talk to our church group or our high school students or, alums at your college organization and talk about your career and why you were so successful. And I would always know in the back of my mind, like, oh, I was successful because I lied my way through the downtime. So anyway.
That's what impresses me so much about the story, and why it's so hard for me, because there was an opportunity for you to make everything whole, and it potentially in previous interviews there was one where people would have made a 15%, 20% return on that investment, and it would have made them whole, and that was the part I wrestled with. But at the end of this, I'm going to reveal something, and a guy like you who's getting ready to face indictment, I couldn't be more proud of you, and can't believe how much faith you restored in me, because I don't know if I'd have had the wherewithal to do what you've done, but it was it's the world versus God, right? Kind of is the name of your story, and while being able to make everyone whole, while you weren't lucratively enriching yourself, and the fact that that was too much and living that lie that you would turn yourself in with a wife and kids, it was just so hard for me to wrap my head around that. So I just needed to throw that in there right now, so that, because I know there's other people listening to this that are probably like, man, if I'm sitting by the lake with this guy, I'm probably having a different conversation with him. Like, man, let's just try and make all this whole and let's repent for that once we're done. Which I know is the humanistic behavior, but at the end of the day, I know you did the right thing. And that's hard for me because I don't know if I would have.
I appreciate you saying that, Mitch. I, it's something I still wrestle with to this day because, as more details come out, I find out that people allocated capital that, from places that maybe they shouldn't have, but regardless, like I lost money that they couldn't afford to lose. And so then I wonder, well, what's worse, me continuing to lie, or them, an 80-year-old man having his retirement money that he counted on a what was supposed to be a very low risk investment because it had real property, real assets with cash flow. That bothers me, my conscience, still to this day. Don't get me wrong, there was a huge weight selfishly lifted off my shoulders when I came clean, but I do feel bad for the losses that I caused because, I'm learning that some of those losses were bad for people, and even though my approach to investing is, I only invest money I can afford to lose, besides my house and my wife and kid, but that from a passive investment standpoint, if I were, I have to be empathetic that other people don't always do that. And it's still on me. I'm the one that caused those losses, and I've just heard several stories that some of the people that invested had put their capital from areas like their retirement and had expected to cash out on that and retire at the same time. And, it was a huge hit to them financially. And, I've been in financial trouble. I obviously am now. But I've been in the past where, you think even something like a paycheck's going to come and then you get laid off a few days before Christmas. So I understand the emotional relationship that we can have with money and how damaging it can be when you take a loss like that. So
How does your conscience weigh the two?
Man, it's hard, and I still think like I did the right thing as far as turning myself in. Maybe not how I turned myself in. Maybe I should have told my investors before I told the feds. And maybe that would have given an opportunity to try to salvage some money or come up with a plan. The thought never crossed my mind until, just a few months ago. Like somebody talked to me and said, hey, I was actually speaking at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. That's where the guy, he came up to me afterwards and he was like, hey man, I know it's hindsight's 2020, but you probably should have just got on the phone with your investors or maybe a handful of your largest investors and come up with a plan to have a softer landing. But, when you ask, how do I reconcile the two? It's, I think the most challenging things in life have no simple answer, right? It's like going to war, for example. I used to struggle with later in my career, not agreeing with how the United States was still in Afghanistan and Iraq after so many years, but I still volunteered to go over there several times after I had already come to that viewpoint. And so it was like this moral dilemma of, well, I want to go and still do something that I feel is good whether it was humanitarian operations or whatever, or just being a good leader to my Marines, even though I didn't agree with the overall strategic mission. And so I feel like it's kind of a similar thing in my mind. It's like, I've got to come clean on this. And I know that me coming clean is going to mean some loss and pain for other people. And the only way I can do it, and part of that was writing the book, is I feel like I can still do something in my life where I can eventually make these investors whole, but still live my life by a code that I had previously lived by, and just put my integrity first, which I think is the right thing to do and the better example for my children. Like, as I said, if, I think it's better now the way I handled it than if 10 or 20 years down the road, everything seems hunky-dory on the outside, but, somebody knows and says, you know what, that Bellatorum Resources is it's just a built on lies, regardless if it's making money or not. It only exists today because it used lies and deceit to get where it is. I just don't think I could, I don't think that would have been the right path,
I kind of run a theme, if you will, sometimes of it had to happen. There's just certain things in our life that have to happen. And I'm wondering if this isn't that moment where this had to happen in order for something greater to come by. And I don't know what your punishment is yet. And I was thinking about that too. And I was sitting there thinking, man, you know what? I pray for leniency for this guy. I pray for all these things for you, because the way you did it, the story and how you did it was all out of goodness. I mean, it was a fraud out of goodness, if that's even possible, I guess you would say. And I'm sure you've wrestled with this a million times, but there's something that hit me about as hard as anything could hit me. And this is why I love doing what I do here. But it was Brian in his interview that asked you this, and I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. But he had asked you the question, what would you tell other people about your story? And you used this sentence. You said, failure is an option. Explain that.
Well, it's a lot. I'll try to give you a concise, answer, but we hear so often that failure is not an option. And sometimes it's a battle cry. It's a motivating, little catchphrase that when you get up in the morning and you're going to go work out, it's like, failure's not an option. Right. But it's not, the world is not black and white. Some things are black and white, but most things, the challenging things are not. And failure has to be an option, because when you teach yourself that failure is not an option, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I would imagine that a lot of people this will resonate with, if failure is not an option, then that means you'll do anything to succeed. And you shouldn't be willing to do anything to succeed. You shouldn't be willing to lie, cheat, steal, murder, whatever, in order to succeed. And there's a time to step back and say, you know what, I screwed this up. It's going to fail but you can fail gracefully. You can fail with your integrity intact. You can fail to live another day, and I know I'm guilty of always using like military cliches and jargon, but if you look at your life like a war, you can lose a battle. You can lose several battles. I mean, the US wouldn't be here if they didn't look at the long game. We lost so many battles, but we kept fighting. So failing and accepting failure and admitting failure doesn't mean defeat, because the only victory in life is at the very end. And, and so I think that has changed my perspective on life, this Bellatorum experience, because I believed down to my core that failure was not an option in anything, like, in any task or business venture or anything. And that's just not true. You got to be able to fail. And it's how you fail, right? It's literally the mechanics and the logistics of that failure, but then also how you react afterwards and how you march on afterwards. So
If you would have had that wisdom and just said, I failed and none of this came through, different story.
yes, 100%. I probably wouldn't have met you, Mitch. Probably wouldn't be sitting here today. Who knows what I'd be doing, but I never would have made it past, and failure also can be temporary, right? It didn't mean, I'm not saying that the only option for me would have been, okay, shut down the business, but it could have been a serious setback as far as like, hey, this guy screwed, he wasn't ready for 22.7. And then, the all that money that those millions of dollars that came that, just in a year's time, basically 10x the amount of capital we had. But I wasn't ready. That's the truth. So maybe that looked like, hey, let's pause, which would have been a temporary failure. Let's get our stuff together, figure it out, and live to fight another day. Or maybe it was shutting down the business and just going back to the drawing board. Who knows? But I would have had my integrity intact, and nobody would have been able to say, hey, that guy committed fraud and he lied to a bunch of people and lost a bunch of people's money. So
this is why I when I got a hold of this story, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be one of the most intriguing ones I've ever done, because I'm one of those guys too. Failure is not an option. And after you'd said that, man, did I sit and think about that for a long, long time, and how it would literally alleviate a lot of problems at time. And failure's not forever, right? But that was the most unbelievable thing. And this is why I run these stories, because there's people in all types of businesses, all kinds of businesses, and they're faced with the exact same thing that you're faced with. And, one little morsel of good where you say, you know what, failure can be an option, which goes against everything that I ever thought about, honestly. That's why it hit me the hardest, and I appreciate you being so vulnerable and saying that. I think that is the absolute best golden nugget maybe I've even ever heard. I don't know. It's incredible.
Well, thanks, Mitch. I appreciate it. There's a lot more I think that would be valuable for both entrepreneurs and investors in my book. I mean, I talk about when you're setting up things I would have done differently, operational mechanisms and guardrails that I would have put on myself and on the company, just a lot of things. So my goal in writing the book is part of my efforts in trying to make investors whole. And I do think that there's true value in the book. I sent you a copy, by the way, so hopefully it
Yes.
arrives soon. But
Well, and I want to highlight that too. You are also not taking any proceeds from the book. Those proceeds go back to investors.
absolutely, yep.
Which again, I just think is absolutely amazing. I mean, I definitely, again, we do this out of something to maybe make the world a little bit better than what we found it, and every story kind of ties to another one in many, many cases that I've done, and we had a Navy SEAL that he talked about how he was just not necessarily a good man until he was saved, and then all of a sudden he becomes this great warrior of God, if you will, and it kind of had that tone to me, and I'm sitting there thinking, my God, we focus so much on making money and doing whatever the hell we're doing here on earth, when in the end it doesn't really matter. And I have a hope, I have a faith that you're going to get some serious leniency. And I think about your wife. I've never met her, but I think about her now all the time. I think about your kids, who are 13 and 11, right?
Yes, yeah, my two boys, 13 and 11, and they're the ones I worry about the most. My wife is a strong, intelligent woman, and I know she'll be all right. But I know, I had my daddy issues from my father not being around when I was young, and now, look, here I am, possibly leaving them the same, the same thing in their teenage years. So that's what I worry about the most, is like, how long am I going to be gone to not be in their lives, and how are they going to react to it? So,
Man, I just can't fathom it. But what I hope, and maybe this had to happen, but maybe they'll look back at this podcast, and if hopefully it doesn't happen. But if you have to leave for a while, they can maybe look back on this and say, you know what, my dad is a hero. He's my hero. And, man, telling the truth to pay the ultimate price, you have my respect, sir.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Mitch.
Well, I tell you what, I thank you for coming on our show and telling us this story. There will be a part 2, and I hope it's a real happy part 2. I want to thank you for the service to our country. That's huge. It should not be taken lightly. You're one hell of a man in my eyes.
Thanks, Mitch. I appreciate that. And I've been following your show since I found out about it, been binge listening, if you will, since Brian told me about it. And I absolutely love the theme and the content and the guests you've had on. So keep up the awesome work, man. I love what you're doing, and I just appreciate the conversation and the opportunity.
Man, we appreciate those kind words, and let's stay in touch. Part 2 coming up, but I do want to hit it one more time. Tell us the name of the book, where people can get it, and let's get 1 million people to buy that book and pay these investors off.
Oh, I would love that. So it's Burning Bellatorum, the story of a $40 million fraud and its priceless lessons for investors and entrepreneurs, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle only right now, paperback, Kindle version, and hardback. And I'm working on getting the audiobook recorded. It's been a little challenging, but as soon as it's ready, it'll be available on Audible.
All right, and start singing in the shower, too, with the name Chris Bentley, man. That just reeks of country music star. Who knows? Maybe we just turn this all around, all in one shot, buddy. But I appreciate you coming on our show, sharing that story. I know it's tough. I know it's hard. You and I talked before. I'm a big crybaby. I have shed some tears over you, whether you like it or not, but we're going to be praying for you in our corner. And, man, let's just hope grace and mercy is displayed for that courageous decision that you made.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, buddy.
Cheers.
All right, bye-bye.